I request all the participants to rename their name in the Zoom name ID. Those are a trainee, they should mention their name, their year of training and their name of institute. You can see on slide my name. Although I'm no more a student of the AGPJ, but I'm being an alumni. I was showing here like your name, your year, and then your institute and city. So this will help all of you to know more about each other, and this also help us to have good interaction with you also. So some of the people, they join by their mobile name, even they don't write their name. So please write your name, your year of course, and your name of institute and the city.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Sir, wish you a very happy Diwali, sir.
Thank you everyone. Happy Diwali to everyone. Okay, I think we can start. So if there are any final year students, they can start shooting. Identify yourself and then speak.
PC auto support.
Yes.
So I want to put one word over here. This is a session on the where the student have privilege to ask the question to the senior professor V.K. Kapoor sir. Usually it vice versa. The teacher asks question to the students when this open house session. Now student will ask question to sir relevant to your clinical queries. So please do not hesitate. Unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and put a question. I would say put your query that you feel that you read in the literature. You have any doubt in your mind how you should reply in your exams. So that way you can put a question to Kapoor sir. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. And also I have requested Dr. Vishal Gupta to join me. So he will also address some of your questions. He's currently the head of the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology at AIIMS Bhopal. He was earlier at KGMC Lucknow.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah,
I've joined.
Students, please start. Who are the final year students in the audience? Otherwise, I will have to pick some names. Yeah, I can recognize some of you. So why don't you start?
Good morning, sir. I am
Yes.
Utkarsh. I am Utkarsh from Amrita Institute of Medical Science, Chennai, sir. So my question means I am confused regarding one thing. I am final year student. That in bile duct injury, somewhere I am finding acute bile duct injury, somewhere I am finding chronic. So my confusion is that it's means acute, chronic. It's a type of onset. So type of onset, it's acute, subacute, chronic. So bile duct injury is always sudden. So why means it's sudden onset thing? Means it happens suddenly. So why we use these kind of terms like acute, chronic? Thank you.
Yes, carry on. So you are right that there are no standard terms which have been kind of prescribed. What we have been writing in our publications that there are basically 3 stages of a bile duct injury. So first is acute bile duct injury, which may or may not be associated with bile leak. So for example, if you have a completely transected, clipped or divided, clipped or ligated bile duct, then there is a bile duct injury, but there is no bile leak. Similarly, when you clip and divide an apparent duct, an isolated duct, then again there is a bile duct injury, but there is no bile leak. On the other hand, you could have a bile leak, but you may not, or some classifications do not call it a bile duct injury, or they call it a minor bile duct injury. For example, a subvesical duct, which could be a cholecystohepatic duct, or an aberrant small subsegmental or segmental duct. And even the cystic duct leak in some classifications is mentioned as a minor injury. So the first stage is acute bile duct injury, which is usually but not always associated with bile leak. Now, once there is bile leak, either you have left a surgical drain at the time of cholecystectomy, or you do a re-laparotomy or a re-laparoscopy and then place a drain, or you place a PCD by interventional radiology to drain the bile. So you convert the bile leak or biloma into what is called an external biliary fistula. And it is called controlled external biliary fistula if all the bile which is coming out is draining through the drain. No bile is coming from the wound or from the port sites because it comes from there, then it becomes uncontrolled. There is no collection of bile in the peritoneal cavity. There is no peritoneal sepsis, and preferably there is no biliary sepsis. So this is what is called a controlled external biliary fistula, which is the aim of management of the acute bile duct injury. And with this, the patient can go and stay at home as long as there is no sepsis. The third stage is when the fistula heals, then all patients with a complete transaction and about 50 to 60% of patients with a partial injury will form what is known as a biliary stricture post cholecystectomy. We call it benign biliary stricture, but we have to remember there are other causes of benign biliary stricture also, but the term has been used for this situation. So this is biliary stricture, which, as you mentioned, is a kind of chronic process. So that means that there is evidence of biliary obstruction in the form of jaundice, in the form of derangement of liver function test, in the form of intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation, and a biliary stricture would require a reconstruction, which is usually a surgical repair, but now there are reports of endoscopic reconstruction also by placement of stent. Of course, that is possible only if the ductal continuity is present. At the same time, you should remember that there is an entity called internal biliary fistula. Earlier, we talked of external biliary fistula, but some patients, when the biloma forms, rather than draining outside, it drains into a viscous, usually the first part of the duodenum. So there is a bilioduodenal fistula, and proximally the biloma is communicating with the injured duct. So it becomes a bilioenteric or bilioduodenal fistula. Some of these patients may not have clinical or even biochemical evidence of biliary obstruction because there is an internal biliary drainage. So although there is a complete transaction of CBD, the patient has no jaundice and liver functions are near normal. Some derangement may be there. And this dilemma we will discuss later what to do with it. So these are three stages of a bile duct injury. Yes. Anyone else?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir, can I ask just a question for the interest of the students?
Yes, yes, please.
Sir, why do we say that what is the timing of a bile duct injury repair? An injury has happened today, then when to repair and how much time should we spend?
Okay. So again, a question of semantics and terminology. Avinash, can you please correct the name Dr. Vishal Gupta? Dr. Vikas Gupta is the professor of surgical gastroenterology at PGI Chandigarh. Okay, so timing of repair. Now, timing of repair, again, there is no uniformity in the published literature. What we have been saying that it should be classified or named as immediate or intraoperative repair. That means while doing cholecystectomy, the surgeon has recognized that there is a bile duct injury and the repair is done then and there only. But we have to remember that during laparoscopic cholecystectomy, only in about 1/4 to 1/3, maximum 1/2 of the cases, the injury is recognized during the cholecystectomy. In the remaining cases, in the majority of cases, the surgeon thinks everything has gone on fine, but yet there was a bile duct injury. So if the injury is recognized during the cholecystectomy and the repair is done then and there only, then it is called immediate or intraoperative repair. I would add at this stage that there is enough evidence, although all of you are going to be GI surgeons, but when you talk to your general surgical colleagues, you need to educate them, you need to tell them, you need to request them that this should not be attempted by a non-biliary surgeon. A repair should always be attempted by a biliary surgeon. Now, this philosophy of immediate or intraoperative repair has been extended to the early post-operative period, 24, some people say 48 hours, especially if there is no evidence of sepsis. So suppose there is a clipped or ligated duct, there is no bile leak, so that means that there is no biloma, there is no bile contamination of peritoneal cavity, and there is no sepsis. For the first 24 or 48 hours, also some people say that if you do a repair, the results are as good or as bad as immediate or intraoperative repair. Then comes early repair. Early repair means within the first week. Again, there is no definite definition, but first week. Again, this duration would depend whether there is bile leak and sepsis or not, because the basic principle is that at the time of doing repair, there should not be biliary sepsis, either in the peritoneal cavity or in the biliary tree. So some people would extend this to maybe 2 weeks, but there is no uniform definition. The ideal time to repair, according to most series and most centers, is what is known as a late or delayed repair, which is after about 4 to 6 weeks of the injury, when all bile has been drained out of the peritoneal cavity and all sepsis has been controlled. Anything in between, that means from 7 days to 4 weeks or 6 weeks, is called the intermediate repair in some reports. And most of these reports have shown that this is the worst time to operate. Either you should preferably do a very early repair, or you should wait and do a delayed repair. But all this is when there is bile leak. If there is no bile leak, then I suppose these definitions can be modified. For example, you could probably repair even after 1 week or 10 days if it is a clipped or ligated duct with no bile leak and no cholangitis. So these are some terms which have been variously used in published reports. If people don't ask, I will have to start naming the students one by one that you have to ask. See, we have started this forum only for you people. If you people don't ask questions, then the very purpose is defeated. Yes, hello. Jaya. Jaya has raised a hand. Good. Jaya, go ahead.
Sir, I had a case where we did a lab coli and it came out to be incidental bladder carcinoma, and that patient suffers a big injury. That what is the time to intervene? Like we have done a completion coli, extended cholecystectomy in such a patient.
Yeah, so this is a very peculiar problem, but it does happen sometimes, especially in North India, where gallbladder cancer is very common. I think KGMC had published a report, so I will request Dr. Vishal to maybe take up this. Vishal, so there is a bile duct injury and there is an incidental gallbladder cancer also.
Right, sir. So basically, this is a scenario of double trouble. So it all depends what is the presentation of bile duct injury and what is the stage of incidental gallbladder cancer. And basically, it was true incidental cancer, or it was some kind of unsuspected, or it was a surprise during operative procedure, and the surgeon ignored the intraoperative finding. So in case there is a minor bile duct injury, like there is a leak from cystic duct stump or from gallbladder bag, type A injury, and that resolves spontaneously in next 1 or 2 weeks, then I think as per the standard recommendation, we can do completion radical cholecystectomy for incidental gallbladder cancer, maybe after 4 or 6 weeks after restaging. But in case of major injury, then it becomes a problem, because in those situations, it becomes difficult to make a balance between the timing of surgery and I think there is some background
Somebody's
noise.
microphone is on. Yeah, Vishal, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in case of major bile duct injury, it becomes very difficult to make a correct decision in terms of timing of reintervention, because for bile duct injury, we want to wait for at least 6 weeks. And for incidental cancer, again, we want to go early. So that becomes difficult to do, because in the presence of local inflammation because of ongoing bile leak as such, the complete nodal clearance become difficult. So it is a very rare situation, and decision has to be made on case-to-case basis, because we have published around 6 to 7 cases, and majority we could not do the completion radical cholecystectomy for curative purpose. And most of these patients actually had metastatic disease at the time of re-entry. So it is a difficult situation, and the decision has to be made on case-to-case basis.
Yeah, so again, to summarize, I would say that it will depend on the stage of the malignancy and the expected outcome of the malignancy and the type and severity of the bile duct injury. Prachin, did you want to ask something? You have mentioned your name, Prachin from PGI Chandigarh. Okay, there are 2 questions from Srinivas. First, I will take the easier one first. The role of papillotomy in bile duct injury. Vishal, you may like to address this. When should we do the endoscopic intervention, and what is its role?
Yes, I think these 2 questions are related. So the role of endoscopic interventions, that is often asked in the presence of a scenario of post-cholecystectomy bile leak. So either there is a bilioma and PCD has been placed, and then there is an ongoing external bile leak or biliary fistula. So the question also arises: what is the indication for endoscopic intervention in terms of timing? When should we ask endoscopics to do the ERCP and subsequent procedure? And second is regarding the papillotomy. So papillotomy is one of the endoscopic intervention. So there are 2 options for endoscopic intervention. One is just sphincterotomy or papillotomy, and second is biliary stent placement. And third is combination of these 2. So which one is more effective? I think literature suggests that if you combine these 2 procedures, stenting plus papillotomy, although to place a stent, papillotomy is not always necessary, and even 7 French stent can be placed without sphincterotomy. Papillotomy alone has relatively higher reintervention rate in the presence of this biliary leak. So these patients will require again re-papillotomy or endoscopic stent placement for control of fistula. So I think papillotomy alone may not be as effective as the combination of papillotomy plus stent placement. And regarding the timing, I think there is no clear-cut recommendation regarding the amount of bile leak, volume of bile leak, and the timing. But in general, if it is a high output biliary fistula, maybe more than 200 or 300 per day, persisting for more than 7 to 10 days, then I think it is advisable to go for endoscopic papillotomy, endoscopic intervention, provided you have some proof that there is a biliodigestive continuity. So that becomes very important. So in the presence of post-operative, post-cholecystectomy, external biliary fistula, asking for ERCP and endoscopic intervention directly without having any evidence of biliodigestive continuity, I think that is not something advisable. It is better to have some cholangiogram in the form of either tubogram or MRCP before we ask for ERCP.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is that it depends on the philosophy. As I say that there are basically 2 philosophies. One is an aggressive philosophy and one is a conservative philosophy. So if you follow the aggressive philosophy for endoscopic intervention, which you can do if you have an expert endoscopist as a colleague who has very low morbidity of endoscopic intervention, then at the earliest evidence of bile leak, you can go for endoscopic intervention, which, as Dr. Vishal said, would invariably include a papillotomy and a stent or ENBD placement. What it does, it decreases the intrabiliary pressure, it diverts the bile away from the fistula, So it definitely hastens the closure of the fistula and reduces the fistula closing time. There is no doubt about it. At the same time, yes, it has its own cost and the morbidity. So that is if you follow an aggressive philosophy. And their kind of hypothesis is that if it is a complete transaction, we will know about it when we do the cholangiogram, and then the procedure will be abandoned. Because a prerequisite for endoscopic intervention is continuity of the duct. On the other hand, there are some conservative surgeons, including myself, who would wait. So suppose I see bile in the drain, or there is a biloma which I have drained, and if the patient is not frankly toxic in the form of cholangitis, which then becomes an indication for endoscopic intervention, I would probably wait, see the clinical course of the patient, see the fistula output, and if the fistula output is not decreasing over a period of time, and we have done something to demonstrate ductal continuity. So how do you demonstrate ductal continuity? A simple bedside test could be that you look at the stool color. If the stool is yellow, most probably there is a ductal continuity in the early postoperative period. In the very early postoperative period, till about 10 to 14 days, we don't do a fistulogram because the tract is not well formed. So fistulogram is only at a later date. If you have the facilities, you could do an isotope scan, which is less expensive than an MR. CP does not involve radiation. So that could show whether ductal continuity is there. Many endoscopists now, before going on in for endoscopic intervention, they would want an MRCP as a roadmap. So that would tell you whether the ductal continuity is there. So that would be the conservative approach of endoscopic intervention. But if the ductal continuity is there and if the fistula output is not decreasing over a period of time, then an endoscopic intervention definitely decreases the fistula closure time. Between stent and ENBD, both work the same. Each has its advantage and disadvantage. The advantage of ENBD is that you can do repeat cholangiogram very easily. You don't have to do a repeat endoscopy. You can remove it very easily, just pull it out. You can irrigate. Suppose there is frank pus, there are stones, there is severe cholangitis, you can do irrigation. You can even instill antibiotics through it for local application. But it is kind of discomfort to the patient because the tube comes out through the nose. Plus, it diverts or drains the bile externally, whereas stent drains the bile internally. Subtle indication for one over the other could be that if your cholangiogram reveals that it is a minor, so-called minor injury, which is likely to close in a few days' time, like a cholecystohepatic duct or a divided apparent duct, sorry, not divided apparent duct, because in that case, the endoscopic intervention will not help, a cystic duct blowout, then some people may leave an ENBD, hoping that in a few days' time, the leak will stop. You can do a cholangiogram through the ENBD and then just remove it. But most people would probably place a stent.
One of the situation, one of the indication in which early RCP, irrespective of philosophy, is advisable is the presence of CVD stone. So if there is evidence of bile leak, you get the ultrasound, there is a stone lower down in the CVD. I think that would be the indication for early RCP.
Definitely. So if either clinically or on ultrasound or whatever imaging you have done, there is a suspicion of stone. So when do you suspect a CVD stone post-cholecystectomy bile leak? If there was evidence of CVD stone pre-operatively, if the patient had jaundice, cholangitis, pancreatitis, if this LFT was deranged, if you have multiple small stones in the gallbladder, if you have a wide cystic duct where intraoperatively a stone may have slipped down. So in all these situations, you suspect that the cause of bile leak, especially if it is a cystic duct blowout, could be an impacted stone. And in that situation, definitely an endoscopic intervention. In fact, that is one of the positive points mentioned by the aggressive philosophy following surgeons, that you can detect and remove a CVD stone, which could be the cause of cystic duct leak. Now, as an addition to the earlier issue that we discussed, Govind has said that if there is a bile duct injury and incidental gallbladder cancer, should it not be considered as peritoneal spread? Yeah, I mean, I won't say peritoneal spread, but there is definitely peritoneal contamination, because there is soft evidence, indirect evidence, retrospective evidence that during the index cholecystectomy, if there was bile spill, which happens quite frequently during lap chole, then the outcome in terms of peritoneal dissemination and survival is poorer as compared to when it was not there. But at the same time, if you know that there was peritoneal spill, it doesn't mean that you don't reoperate or you don't offer reoperation to this patient. So outcome is poor, but still you follow the principles of completion extended cholecystectomy. Only thing I would add is that in such cases, even if otherwise it is not indicated, you would add adjuvant chemotherapy. Govind also wants to know use of transanastomotic stents in bile duct injury repair. Again, like so many other issues in bile duct injury, this is also very controversial, debatable. Different groups follow different policies. The Johns Hopkins group, in all their publications, they always cannulate the ducts pre-operatively. Just before the operation, they almost always cannulate the ducts on both sides. And then they use these catheters as transhepatic, transanastomotic stents. And they recommend that they should be kept for a long time, at least 6 months, maybe 12 months, with frequent exchanges every 3 to 4 months. But we at SGPGI did not follow the same policy. We tended to disagree with them. We use transanastomotic stents selectively. Selectively means that if the anatomy is good, if the duct is dilated, if the duct is holding the sutures well, if they are not cutting through, if we have been able to achieve a good stoma, and if the surgeon is finally happy with the anastomosis, then we would not use a transanastomotic stent. But if any of these conditions is not fulfilled, and ultimately you think that you are not going to end up with a healthy, happy anastomosis to normal ductal mucosa, so which means if the duct is undilated, if it is a high stricture like type 4, if you are going into the liver parenchyma to get the duct, if you think that the duct wall is fibrotic, it is not normal, healthy mucosa, and it is likely to restricture, if the duct is thin-walled, especially when you are doing an early repair, if during surgery the sutures are cutting through and you anticipate that there is going to be leak. So in all these situations, we would use either, again, we tend to differentiate. One is proximal biliary drainage. That means you leave the catheter proximal to the anastomosis in the intrahepatic duct. That is for biliary decompression, to decrease the intrabiliary pressure, for proximal biliary drainage, so that it is like a stoma in a GI anastomosis, that leak will still occur, but the consequences of leak will be less. On the other hand, if you advance the catheter across the anastomosis and the end of the catheter lies in the jejunum, then it becomes a transanastomotic stent, which will not prevent a leak, which will not decrease the chances of leak. It is to prevent a future anastomotic fibrotic stricture. And for that reason, if you use it as a transanastomotic stent, you should leave it at least for 6 months, maybe 1 year. Because proximal biliary drainage is to take care of the anastomotic leak. So once at 5 or 7 or 10 days, you do a cholangiogram and you demonstrate there is no leak, then you can remove the proximal biliary drainage after about 2 to 3 weeks. But transanastomotic stents have to be kept for long. So our policy was to use these stents selectively. Excess loop in high bile duct injury. What is excess loop? Excess loop means that either the end of the jejunum or the side of the jejunum. So either before the anastomosis or after the anastomosis, the jejunum is brought to the parietes and hitched to the parietal peritoneum. Some people would even make an opening in the parietes and bring it in the subcutaneous plane. And the extreme would be to bring it out as a formal stoma. But all that is not done today. Maximum what is done is that it is hitched to the parietal peritoneum, either anterior midline or laterally in the flank. And then the area is marked with radio opaque clips. So you place a ring of clips around so that it is easy for the radiologist to identify. This was done earlier by some groups. We also did some cases when again you anticipated a very high risk of anastomotic stricture, or when you are doing a biliary enteric anastomosis, say for intrahepatic lithiasis, entity called Oriental cholangiohepatitis or Asiatic cholangiohepatitis, where primary stones are there in the CVD and the intrahepatic ducts, where you do a very high end-to-side anastomosis. So we stopped doing it, and most groups have stopped doing it because most of the radiologists are comfortable going through the liver rather than through the jejunum, even if an anastomotic stricture forms. So I think very few groups now would make an excess loop. Anything Ajay or Vishal would like to add to these two issues, debatable issues? Ajay, you would like to?
I agree that excess loop was being used initially, and then subsequently with the intervention radiology gradually picking up, actually they have taken over. Originally, excess loop was designed so that a scope can be passed through this loop into the anastomosis, and then either for the dilatation of the anastomosis or the removal of the stones. But definitely now excess loop is no more being used unless it's a very difficult procedure. Regarding the timing of the surgery, I would say that the patient which is not having a bile leak, if the patient does not have a bile leak, it's a clipped duct, and he does not have any biloma or a collection, I think whenever the patient presents, that's a suitable time. I agree that the patients who had presented early will not have a dilated duct, so should be done only by the experts in their field, and specifically the people, the surgeons who have been doing either the transplant sections or who have been dealing with the undilated ductal systems. But if somebody who is having a undilated ductal system and a new person tries to put his foot into it, then definitely this undilated ductal system is likely to have a higher chance of stricture. We have to understand from the traditional books which has been read for last 30 years that the best time of repair is the first repair. This is the borderline that we have to understand with every repair that we are going in for any procedure. If you do a repair and it undergoes a stricture, then the second stricture will be a more difficult to do an anastomosis. Second thing that we have to understand always when we are trying to going in early for any bile duct injury repair is that the strictures tend to ascend following the primary injury. So we give a time for the anastomotic stricture to ascend. Though we do a hepatocogenostomy always at the hilum, that is, it is not a choledocogenostomy, it is a hepatocogenostomy at the hilum of the right and left duct with a duct extension into the left, opening extension into the left duct. But if you see a bile duct injury at that site, sometimes you will find that the stricture may ascend over a period of time beyond it. So give it a time so that it ascends and then gives a final shape to do a reconstruction. I think there are two other aspects which I would like to just add on. Maybe Vishal can add something if he.
Thank you. Yeah, Vishal, anything you would like to add?
So, sir, I think excess loop, it is not very used even in difficult cases. For Dr. John already said, intervention radiologists they have taken over, and they are.
Vishal, your voice is not clear.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
It is clear. So the current excess loop is not very much used nowadays because already intervention radiologists they are good at punching the liver percutaneously. And second, regarding the time, I think I totally agree. The first repair is best repair, provided it is done by expert pulmonary surgeon at the right time. That's all. Nothing important.
Yeah. So Prachin wants to know the management of Strasberg type D injury, which is a partial or lateral injury. Now, this is one injury where two or three things are important. One, that there will definitely be a role for endoscopic intervention in the phase of the acute bile duct injury. Endoscopy has a role at two places. One is in the acute bile duct injury. One, as we discussed earlier, that if there is a suspicion of CVD stone as the cause of cystic duct blowout, then definitely it is going to be therapeutic. And second, if there is a bile leak, and especially bile leak in presence of ductal continuity, which is the type D injury, then there is a definite role for endoscopic intervention. But that is only temporizing. And second role of endoscopic intervention is in the definitive management of a established biliary stricture, which comes at a later stage. And there also the prerequisite is that the ductal continuity should be there. Now, in the acute stage, as I said earlier, that you could do endoscopic intervention in all cases, or you could use it selectively. Once you place an endoscopic stent or an ENBD in a type D injury, the fistula will invariably close. We have shown again from SGPGI that when we waited, almost more than 90% of cases, the fistula closed. And in fact, in the remaining 10% also, if we had waited a little longer, the fistula would have closed, following the principle of any fistula, that if there is no distal obstruction, the fistula is going to close. Now, once the fistula closes, whether the patient will form a biliary stricture and have biliary obstruction or not will depend on the extent of injury and the diameter of the duct. So some cases may heal without forming a biliary stricture, without having biliary obstruction. But from patient management point of view, it is very important that even after the fistula is healed and you find LFT is normal and ultrasound shows no IHPRD, you should keep the patient under follow-up at least for 6 months, I would say at least for 1 year, and show that LFT and ultrasound remain normal. Then only you can probably say that there is no stricture, because we know that healing by fibrosis can continue till about 6 to 12 months. So that is the time period that you should wait before you declare that there is no stricture. As I said, about half of the cases with a type D injury, a partial, lateral or incomplete injury, because the duct is not dilated and a significant amount of circumference is involved and fibrosis causes biliary obstruction, will form a biliary stricture with ductal continuity. And there are two options of treatment here. One is surgical, which is, Dr. Ajay said, that irrespective of the type, that means the level of injury, the anastomosis should be at the hilum, at the biliary ductal confluence, extending into the left duct as far as possible, so that you get a good wide stoma. And second option is endoscopic management. Endoscopic management means that they dilate with the balloon, then they place either multiple stents or increasingly sized stents. So first 1 stent, then 2 stent, then 3 stent. These are 2 different protocols of endoscopic management of a biliary stricture. These stents are electively exchanged every 3 to 4 months. And the total duration of stenting has to be almost 1 year, because that is the time up to which fibrosis requires multiple patients, multiple treatments, multiple procedures. And in good strictures, something microphone is on. Can you please switch off your microphone? There is a background. So the endoscopic management is best suited for low strictures, which is bismuth type 1 and type 2. And as I said, the prerequisite is ductal continuity. And now there are even long-term results which are showing good to excellent results in a reasonably good number of cases. But my argument is that these are the very patients in which surgical repair will have almost 100% long-term good or excellent result. So our philosophy at SGPGI was not to refer any patient with biliary stricture for endoscopic management unless there was an absolute contraindication for surgical repair, either in terms of patient's condition, age, comorbidities, so that the patient is not fit for GA, or because there is portal hypertension, which is resulting in extensive collaterals around the hepatoduodenal ligament and hilum, which will make the access difficult, and there is no shuntable anatomy so that we can decrease the portal pressure. Although I must admit that my endoscopy colleagues, especially Dr. Saraswat, who has now joined me here, is very aggressive towards endoscopic management of benign biliary strictures, and he has a large series of patients which he has successfully treated endoscopically also. So for type D strictures, there are 2 options.
Sir, I would like to add that since it is a surgical forum, and if the surgeon has found a type D injury, that is a lateral injury into the bile duct, and he operates this patient, don't just put few sutures and come out. Always try to do a definitive repair, because for the patient, it is a surgery at the end.
Yes.
We can't wait for a stricture to happen and then you say that I have put in a suture and now a stricture has happened and now you want to go in again. So it's better if you have gone in, do a definitive hepatogenostomy and come out rather than putting a few sutures at the leak site.
Yeah.
I think it will also depend on the extent of injury because type D is the relatively. So if it is less than half of circumference, which is involved. So there may be clear injury because of excessive traction during section. So in those scenarios, I think one to find.
Vishal, your audio is not clear.
Yeah, there is disturbance from your end.
Hello.
No, your voice is not. There is a lot of disturbance at your end. Maybe just switch the microphone off and on once.
Hello.
Now, maybe just speak now.
Hello, it is clear?
Yes, it is better now. It is all right. Yes, please
I
say
was
again.
saying type D injury, it encompasses a range of injury. It is a lateral injury, so it can involve a few millimeter of injury, or it can extend even more than half of circumference of the CVD. So if it is a very small tear, like at the cystic duct CVD junction because of excessive traction, so I think 1 or 2 fine sutures can be used. But in case of it is a more extensive injury involving more than half of circumference. So I think in that situation, that primary repair will not be sufficient, and proper hepatogenostomy will be required.
Yeah, so this is the reason why we always emphasize, and we request you to emphasize the same thing again, where you're addressing your general surgical colleagues, that even if it is involving a suture repair, the decision whether to do a suture repair or to do a proper formal Roux-en-Y hepatogenostomy is very crucial. And that decision, we understand and we should accept, is very difficult for a general surgeon who doesn't deal with common bile duct routinely. Will be very, very difficult. So that is why whatever kind of repair is done, the decision has to be taken, and the repair preferably should be done by a biliary surgeon. Utkarsh wants to know what should be the size of anastomosis for a Roux-en-Y HJ. Ajay, you would like to take this?
Yes, sir. I think a very valid question that we know that the normal CBD size is around 6 to 8 millimeters. I think everybody will agree to that. So making an anastomosis of 6 to 8 millimeters is not sufficient. The thing is that the anastomosis, whatever you will make, it will shrink to 1/3 of the size, whatever anastomosis you make. Say, for example, if you make a 3 centimeters anastomosis today, it will shrink to 1 centimeter size anastomosis after some time because of the fibrosis. This is what we have to always take into consideration. Now, if the anastomosis, therefore, to make it to be around 6 to 8 millimeters, it should be more than 2 centimeters size of an anastomosis, preferably always, because it will shrink down to approximately 8 millimeters or 7 millimeters at the end. So this is the minimum size. But if you make a larger anastomosis, it is not harmful. That is the reason why we say that going in and doing a hepatogenostomy at an earlier stage with an undilated ductal system is more difficult, because making a wider stoma might be difficult. But if you go in late, when you have a very good dilated ductal system, making a stoma of around 2.5 to 3 centimeters might be relatively easy. So over a period of time, even if it shrinks, there will be a good stoma of approximately 1/3 of the size, whatever you have made an anastomosis of.
Yeah, so only thing, Utkarsh, I would add to what Dr. Ajay said, that you make as large a stoma as is technically possible. Now, sometimes you may have a limitation if you have undilated duct, and if the anatomy is such that the left duct is vertical. When you have a left vertical duct, the extra hepatic part of the left duct is going to be small. Obviously, you cannot achieve 2 or 3 centimeters stoma. What is more important is that the anastomosis should be done to the fibrosis-free, normal, healthy, vascularized mucosa. And that is why you go as high as possible. And if that condition is fulfilled, even a smaller stoma may be adequate. On the other hand, if you make a large stoma, but the duct to which your anastomosis is fibrotic, it is going to have an anastomotic stricture. So you try to create as big a stoma as is possible, and that can be done if you make the anastomosis at the hilum and extend the incision, the ductotomy, into the extrahepatic horizontal part of the left hepatic duct, which lies at the base of the segment 4, which you expose by the procedure called lowering of the hilar plate. Govind wants to know that day 3 or day 4 after lap chole and we suspect bile leak, what should be done, ultrasound or CT? Vishal, what would be your approach?
First of all, how do you you had a suspicion of bile leak? Basically,
Patient is not
based on
well,
your
patient is not doing well.
clinical, yes, sir, clinical symptoms. So I think first step is to get the ultrasound,
Yes.
just to see what is happening. So there may be some collection in the GB fossa or Morrison's pouch. There may be HBRD, CBD is dilated. There may or may not be CBD stone. So depending on the situation, and suppose ultrasound is otherwise normal, and still you have a strong suspicion of bile leak, then it is better to go for CT scan in this situation.
Yeah, so I would reiterate the same, that obviously first investigation is ultrasound, but don't stop at ultrasound. If your clinical suspicion is strong and if the ultrasound is normal, but patient is not doing well, go ahead and do cross-sectional imaging, which could be CT or MR, whatever your preference. The next question from Govind is that post HJ for bile duct injury, how do we decide whether to go for redo surgery or it? So you mean a stricture. So we have done a hepaticojejunostomy and now patient has an anastomotic stricture. What is the approach for management? Yes, radiological or surgical? Ajay, you would like to address this?
Yes, sir. Actually, if we see theoretically what has been established role is a intervention radiologist doing a dilatation of the hepaticojejunostomy site. That is the first line of management always for a strictured HJ anastomosis. But if you don't have a good intervention radiologist, then I don't think there is any harm in going in again by a redo surgery in this group. But that is only possible in the absence of an intervention radiologist, or your intervention radiologist says that he is not able to dilate. The third condition in which it may be a much more difficult scenario is following a strictured hepaticojejunostomy, you find that the right and the left ductal systems are separated as the anastomotic stricture had ascended beyond the site of anastomosis. Then now you have to rethink about what is the next plan of surgical procedure is, which may require sometimes a hepatectomy. Or if it is possible, you can do a revision hepaticojejunostomy in this group of patients. So always try to attempt a revision hepaticojejunostomy if the HJ dilatation is not possible by an intervention radiologist, but it may be difficult. If the anastomosis is already ascended beyond the site of hepaticojejunostomy, in that case, always go by a guided PTBD catheters prior to going in for surgery, because it is very difficult to identify these ducts which have already ascended beyond the previous hepaticojejunostomy site. I think I don't have those slides right now. Dr. Kapoor will agree that we have had recently 4 patients of the same types which we have recently repaired, and it is really difficult to find out those ducts in the intrahepatic portion.
Yeah. So we also go by the anatomy. When the patient has developed a restricture, obviously you will do an MR cholangiogram, and it depends on what you see on MR cholangiogram. Because sometimes if the initial repair was not a proper hepaticojejunostomy done at the biliary ductal confluence or the hilum, you may find that in the MR cholangiogram you see a virgin, untouched left hepatic duct, which means that the previous HJ was not appropriate. And in these situations, most of the cases we will go for a re-hepaticojejunostomy. But as Dr. Ajay said, that if you find that the anastomotic stricture has gone right into the hilum and it has separated even the right and left ducts or even the right anterior and posterior ducts, then surgical repair is going to be difficult. And then the preferred approach probably would be interventional radiology, which again is same principle: balloon dilatation, placement of stents across the stricture, frequent change of stents, and leave these stents at least for 1 year. and then see what happens. Also, I must say that if you have a very difficult anastomotic stricture, which is involving the right anterior and posterior sectoral ducts, especially if there is an associated vascular injury, which occurred either at the time of cholecystectomy or at the time of hepaticojejunostomy, which does happen very frequently. And if there is some amount of atrophy, hypertrophy, then your threshold for a hepatectomy, right, hepatectomy at the time of reoperation would be low. The advantage of hepatectomy is that your exposure of the left duct becomes even better, and you can do a much better left hepaticojejunostomy if you do a right hepatectomy. Utkarsh again wants to know, Vishal, that if there is intra-abdominal bile collection, so I presume he means that if it is seen on ultrasound or CT, then should we at that time do an MRI, MRCP or no?
No, I think if you see find bilioma during cross-sectional imaging or ultrasound, I think at that point of time, aim is to drain that collection. And once that is drained, you have controlled the sepsis, then the second step would be to identify the site of leak and assess the anatomy. So getting the MRCP in the presence of bilioma, especially if it is a large, it is not going to give you complete information, because sometimes the bilioma lie in the hepatoduodenal ligament area and overlaps the CBD, and that true picture is not apparent on the MRCP. So it is better to drain that collection, and then depending on the outcome of that drainage, whether this bile leak is persisting, it is high output or low output, and then you can get the MRCP.
Yeah. So students, you have to understand that what are the aims, or what information do we get from MRI? One is that you can detect a biloma. So you can use MRI as an alternative to CT, which I personally prefer, especially in young women, to avoid radiation. So then it is all right that you are doing it for detection of biloma and then draining it. Second is you want to see the ductal continuity, as we discussed earlier. If you have the conservative approach for endoscopic intervention, you don't want to do an endoscopy if there is complete transaction. So MRI may give you that information. But the point which Dr. Vishal made is very, very important, that if there is a biloma, it may obscure the anatomy and it may not let you visualize the biliary tree. So the very purpose for which you were doing it, to detect ductal continuity, may not be served. And that is why complete visualization of the images, especially by rotating the images, is very important. You should rotate the images and then try to see. Third aim of MRCP, where it is a must, is when you are doing the repair. At that time, an MRC is a must. Today, nobody will do, and nobody should accept doing a biliary injury or stricture repair without a preoperative MR cholangiogram. So that is the third aim, but that is done just before the repair. So if you understand these three things, you can use ultrasound, CT, and MRI judiciously. I think the last question that I will take is again from Nirmal. What is the indication or role of HIDA? HIDA is one of the isotopes which is used. The name of the investigation is isotope hepatobiliary scintigraphy. HIDA, I say, is a medical slang, and my suggestion is that we should try to avoid using slang as far as possible. So don't call it HIDA, call it scintigraphy or isotope scintigraphy. Now, it's a very good investigation, and we all know that it is a very good investigation to diagnose or to rule out acute cholecystitis, because if you do isotope scintigraphy and gallbladder is visualized, that means it virtually rules out acute cholecystitis. Now, in the setting of bile duct injury, its role is to see whether there is extra biliary isotope activity in the peritoneal cavity or not. So if you suspect a bile leak and you do an isotope scintigram and you don't see any extra biliary activity in the peritoneal cavity, that virtually rules out a bile leak. As I said earlier, it doesn't rule out a bile duct injury, because you can have a bile duct injury without bile leak also. So it only rules out bile leak. But today, most people will not do it, because more important than bile leak is that whether bile is collecting inside. So that is why ultrasound or CT or MRI become more important, because they can guide you to drain the bile also. Where
Sir, can I ask a question, sir?
Recently, in last maybe 5 years, that there is something wrong. We did an yes. So in that situation, we did an isotope study, and because there was no extrabiliary activity, we were assured that there is no bile leak. So it is basically very good to rule out bile leak rather than to diagnose bile leak. Yes.
Sir, hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, is there any role of delayed repair if there is a complete transaction of the CBD, if the patient presents to us in the immediate post-op period from elsewhere saying that there's a complete transaction, what should be our approach?
Yeah. So as we discussed earlier, if the patient is referred to you within 24 or 48 hours, you can treat it as if you have been called during the operation. So you can extend the philosophy of immediate or intraoperative to the first 24 or 48 hours, provided the patient is not in sepsis. Because if the patient is in sepsis, then you should not be doing the repair. The second situation could be if it is a clipped or ligated duct completely transected, and therefore there is no bile leak and there is no contamination of peritoneal cavity. In that case, you may extend the duration of early repair to 7 days, 10 days. I remember we have done a repair even at 14 days because the patient had a completely clipped duct, no bile leak, highly rapidly rising bilirubin. Anatomy was favorable. It was a bismuth type 1 or type 2 structure, good stump confluence formed. There was good amount of ductal dilatation. Patient did not have any features of sepsis, counts were normal. So we went in and did an early repair. So these are exceptions. If there is bile leak, then you should not be doing an early repair. Then the purpose, the aim should be to convert it into external biliary fistula and do a delayed repair.
So one more thing is that we have to rule out the vascular injury also.
Yes, yes. Vascular injury is a contra. Even those people, groups who believe in early repair, they would not do it if there is an evidence of vascular injury. Yeah. I think we will have to stop. It is already 10. So good. Thank you, students, for participating. Thank you, Ajay and Vishal. So 2 announcements. One I have already put in the chat, that the department here at Mahatma Gandhi Hospital, we will be organizing a CME, which is mainly for general surgeons. But I request that if you are free, you can also attend. The registration will be complimentary, but it will be essential to register because then only you will receive the link to attend the meeting. So it's a CME purely on cholecystectomy and its complications. And second is that my book on post-cholecystectomy bile duct injury. I know it's very costly because it is published by a international publisher, Springer, but you can request your hospital or department to get a copy, either a print copy or an e-copy. So thank you again, students. Thank you, Avinash, and thanks Ajay and Vishal for.
Thank you, sir.
So on 13th, the schedule will be as it is. The student who is supposed to present will present a case. But on 20th, Dr. Piyush Sani from AIMS, New Delhi, and Dr. Anu Bihari, my colleague from SGPGI, Lucknow, they have agreed to discuss the operative surgery. So the student who is supposed to present on 20th should prepare operative surgery on portal hypertension, types of operations, indications, contraindications, technique, and complications, and both the experts will moderate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Avinash.